The quantum architect speaks before the train even moves. You've done everything right, and nothing changed. Not because you were lazy, not because you quit too soon, not because you lacked faith or discipline or the kind of raw desire that gets people out of bed before sunrise. You did the work. You read the books, the real ones, the ones with the difficult ideas, not just the ones with the pretty covers and the 15-step frameworks. You said the affirmations. You built the vision board. You meditated through mornings when your mind fought you like a courtroom adversary. You journaled. You sat in discomfort. You showed up, sometimes through tears, sometimes through the specific kind of quiet desperation that doesn't announce itself but sits in your chest like a stone you've learned to breathe around, and you woke up Monday morning with the same life. That feeling has a name, and the name is not failure. The name is disorientation, because there is a fundamental, often catastrophic difference between not having tried and having tried with the wrong tool. When you don't try, at least you know where the problem lives. When you try with the wrong tool, for months, for years, with genuine commitment, you begin to do something far more damaging than giving up. You begin to believe that the problem is you, not your method, not your approach, not the layer at which you've been applying the effort. You, and that belief, once installed, becomes the most self-reinforcing program in the entire system, because every new attempt that fails confirms it. Every course that doesn't produce lasting results adds another data point to the sentence you've unconsciously already pronounced on yourself. And the sentence reads, "I am someone for whom this doesn't work." That is the most expensive lie the personal development industry sells without meaning to. And today we are going to dismantle it, not with motivation, not with inspiration, but with precision. In 1967, a psychologist named Martin Seligman conducted a series of experiments that would eventually rewrite how behavioral science understands human helplessness. He exposed dogs to mild electric shocks in an environment where they could not escape. After repeated exposure, when the environment changed and escape became possible, the dogs didn't move. They had learned, at a level deeper than conscious decision, that effort produced no result, so they stopped trying. Seligman called this learned helplessness, and within a decade, the research expanded to humans, revealing something that should concern every person who has ever tried to change their life and found themselves unable to sustain the change. The nervous system learns futility the same way it learns everything else, through repetition, through experience, through the body registering, again and again, that movement in a certain direction produces no meaningful outcome. If you have tried to change, genuinely tried, with real effort, and found yourself returning to the same patterns, the same results, the same ceiling, you may not be failing. You may have learned helplessness at the level of transformation itself. And the difference between that and actual inability is everything, because learned helplessness is a program, and programs can be rewritten. But only if you first understand what layer they're running on. The train is boarding, and today every passenger is present. Carl Jung is already seated by the window, watching the landscape with the patience of someone who has learned that what you refuse to look at doesn't disappear, it governs. Alan Watts is leaning back with a stillness that looks like indifference and is, as we will discover, a form of diagnosis that most people mistake for detachment. Jordan Peterson is standing, already impatient with the level of comfortable self-deception that tends to fill these conversations, and that he has spent a career refusing to accommodate. Carl Rogers is paying close attention to how you are feeling right now, in this specific moment, as these words arrive. Not what you think about how you feel, but what is actually present in your body as you listen. Joe Dispenza has his eyes on the brain inside your skull with an expression that sits precisely between compassion and urgency, because he has seen what that brain can do when given the right conditions, and he knows how rarely those conditions are created. And Hélio Couto is operating at a frequency that some of you recognize before you can explain why, and the explanation, when it comes, will arrive not as information but as recognition. Today, we also welcome two new passengers aboard this train. The first is Bruce Lipton, a cell biologist who spent years inside laboratories studying the behavior of human cells and emerged with a discovery that should have rewritten everything we know about the relationship between biology and belief. He found that your cells are not governed by your DNA, they are governed by the environment surrounding the cell, and that environment is shaped in measurable, documentable ways by the electrochemical signals produced by your thoughts, your emotions, and most critically, the beliefs running beneath your conscious awareness. He will tell us today why your cells are listening, and why they are primarily listening to the conversation you don't know you're having with yourself. The second new passenger is Rupert Sheldrake, a biologist and researcher whose work on morphic fields and morphic resonance opened a territory that conventional science has been reluctant to enter and unable to fully dismiss. Sheldrake proposed that nature is shaped not only by physical laws but by invisible fields of habit, fields that carry the patterns of what has happened before and influence what happens next. The implications for human transformation are, as we will discover, profound and somewhat unsettling in the best possible way. But before this train departs, the architect has a direct request that is part of the journey, not an interruption of it. If you arrived at this episode without watching the ones before it, you are about to hear answers to questions that have not yet been fully formed inside you. That can feel meaningful at the surface and fail to land anywhere that actually changes anything, which is, given what we are discussing today, more than a little ironic. Episodes 20, 21, and 22 of this Megaseries are on the channel. They are not introductory content. They are layers of an architecture. Each one planted something that this episode is designed to water. If you haven't watched them, go now. The train will be here when you return. The other passengers will wait. Jung, in particular, has infinite patience, though he might note that your reluctance to do the foundational work is itself data worth examining. For those who have been riding since the beginning, welcome back. You are going to recognize something today that you've been carrying without a name for it. Now, to the matter at hand, there is a gap, a specific, measurable, maddening gap between the moment something clicks in your mind and the moment that understanding actually reorganizes your life. Most people spend years inside that gap reading, watching, learning, collecting insight with the diligence of someone who genuinely believes that the next piece of information will finally be the one that makes everything shift. It doesn't shift. And the reason it doesn't shift is not the quality of the information. The reason is the nature of the tool being used to apply it. And until that tool changes, until the layer changes, the gap remains, regardless of how much you fill it with understanding. Imagine you need to open a locked door. You have a key. You insert it, you turn, and the door doesn't open. You try with more force, still nothing. You try different angles. You begin to question whether you actually deserve to be on the other side. You consider that perhaps certain people simply aren't meant to walk through certain doors. The key feels right in your hand. The effort feels genuine. The frustration feels real. And nobody, in any of the courses you took, any of the books you read, told you that the key you're holding belongs to a different door entirely. Carl Jung enters here with the precision that characterized his entire body of work. Jung would tell you that the greatest suffering is not pain itself, it is pain without meaning. And when we assign to our character the failure that belongs to our method, we create a wound that no future effort can heal. Because each new attempt at the wrong layer serves only to confirm the verdict we have already delivered about ourselves. You are not wrong. You have been using the wrong tool. Today, we find out what the right one is. More importantly, we find out why the wrong tool feels so correct when you are inside it, and why that feeling of correctness is itself a symptom of the problem. The train accelerates. The architect invites you to look out the window at three specific stories, not because they are exceptional, because they are ordinary, because they are probably yours, The first is Sarah's story, 4 to 3 years old. Marketing director. 2 kids, a mortgage, and a bookshelf that looks like a research library assembled by someone who genuinely, exhaustively tried. 3 years of therapy. 2 mindfulness retreats. A meditation practice she maintained for 8 months before the schedule made it untenable. She can explain the subconscious to other people with enough clarity that friends regularly tell her she should be a coach. She knows about emotional set points. She knows about Jungian shadow. She knows what vibrational frequency means and how it theoretically affects outcomes. She has highlighted and dog-eared and annotated her way through more genuine wisdom than most people encounter in a lifetime. And the thought that returns every night, in the quiet just before sleep, is the same one that was there 10 years ago. Something is wrong with me, not with the books, not with the teachers, with her. The second story is Marcus's 38 entrepreneur, has read everything Peterson has published, completed 2 neuro-linguistic programming certifications, with instructors who came highly recommended, practiced creative visualization for 90 consecutive days with the kind of military discipline that should, by every account he'd ever read, produce measurable results. The numbers in his business move, sometimes impressively, but the deep pattern doesn't. The ceiling stays at the same height. He breaks through it and finds another one 6 months later. And Marcus has begun to suspect, in the silence he doesn't share with anyone, that perhaps some people are simply constructed for certain results, and he is not constructed for more than what he currently has. That suspicion, by the way, is not humility. It is learned helplessness with a philosophical veneer. The third story has no name, because it's yours, or it was. Or it's happening right now, at a volume you've learned to turn down far enough that you can function, but never quite far enough that it disappears. Alan Watts enters the conversation here with the particular stillness. That has irritated people for decades. People who mistake the absence of urgency for the absence of insight. Watts would say something like this: the fundamental problem with seeking transformation the same way you seek an external object is that the seeking reinforces the very structure you are trying to change. You treat the self that needs transforming as a project to be managed. You set goals for it. You track its progress. You hold it accountable. And the self that is doing the managing, setting the goals, tracking the progress, and holding the other self accountable. That self is the same self that constructed the problem in the first place. You are asking the architect of the maze to design the exit. It's a snake trying to swallow its own tail, which, beyond being ineffective, is anatomically ambitious. The humor in Watts is never decoration. It is the precision that makes the truth land without the defenses going up. But what he is pointing to has clinical and neurological validity that goes well beyond philosophy. Carl Rogers spent his entire career studying the gap between what people report feeling and what they are actually experiencing. He called this incongruence, and the distinction he drew is one of the most important and most overlooked in all of psychology. Incongruence is not lying. It is not hypocrisy. It is dissociation. The person is entirely sincere at the level they can access. They genuinely believe what they're saying, and simultaneously, at a level they cannot easily reach, they carry an emotional reality that is running a completely different program. Rogers discovered that the body knows, the organism knows. He called it the organismic valuing process, the body's continuous, pre-verbal assessment of what is actually true versus what has been declared to be true. And the body's assessment does not read books. It does not respond to affirmations. It responds to experience, to felt sense, to the accumulation of what has actually happened emotionally and physically in a lifetime of living. When Sarah says she believes she deserves abundance, she is being completely sincere at the conscious level. But there is a layer below that, what Rogers would call the organismic level, where a different truth is operating, a truth that was installed before she had language to examine it. And that truth has far more influence over her actual experience of reality than any conscious declaration she could make. This is where Bruce Lipton steps onto the train for the first time. The architect stands. Bruce Lipton spent years studying the behavior of human cells under laboratory conditions and arrived at a set of conclusions that placed him in direct conflict with the central dogma of molecular biology, the idea that DNA is the primary determinant of biological behavior. What Lipton found was different, more interesting, more relevant to every person on this train. The cell, he discovered, is not governed primarily by its nucleus, by its DNA. It is governed by its membrane. The cell membrane is a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. It is, in functional terms, a processor. And the input that drives this processor is not genetic code. It is environmental signal. The membrane reads the environment and determines which genes to activate, which proteins to produce, which functions to perform, based on what the environment is communicating. And what is the environment of your cells? It is the field of electrochemical signals produced by your nervous system, which is produced by your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, your habitual internal states. In terms that don't require a biology degree, your cells are responding to what you feel, not what you say you feel. What you actually feel at the level beneath conscious declaration. And they have been responding to it since before you were born, building systems, calibrating responses, establishing defaults that now operate as your biological baseline. Lipton's research on the developmental window between birth and age 7 revealed something that should fundamentally change how we think about personal change. During this period, the brain is predominantly operating in theta waves, the same slow wave state used in hypnosis, in deep meditation, in the hypnagogic state just before sleep. In theta, the brain is not critically analyzing incoming information. It is absorbing it directly, installing it. Everything a child sees, hears, experiences, and witnesses during this period goes in without a filter, without examination, without the possibility of conscious rejection. This is efficient from an evolutionary standpoint. The child downloads the operating system of the culture, the family, the tribe, the behaviors and beliefs needed to navigate that specific environment. The problem is that the environment of a child in a household marked by financial anxiety, emotional unavailability, religious fear, or chronic stress installs an operating system calibrated for that environment. And then the child grows up, moves into a different environment, discovers personal development, and tries to install new software while the old operating system is still running underneath everything. What happens when you try to run new software on an incompatible operating system? Exactly what is happening in your life right now. Jordan Peterson steps in here with the particular directness that has made him both widely followed and widely uncomfortable. Peterson would say that most people resist this conversation not because they don't believe it, but because believing it fully implies a responsibility they are not yet prepared to accept. If your current reality is the output of a program you didn't consciously choose, then changing your reality requires you to go back to the source code, not the surface behavior, not the conscious declaration, not the vision board, the source code. And that is difficult in a way that reading about difficulty is not. There is a difference, Peterson would insist, between engaging with hard ideas and doing hard things. The personal development space has become extraordinarily sophisticated at providing the experience of the former while allowing people to avoid the latter. You can feel deeply understood, deeply inspired, deeply moved, and return to exactly the same life. The feeling is real. The change is not. Cleaning is not the same as reorganizing. You can reorganize a house for years, systematically, diligently, with excellent organizational tools. If the house is dirty, it is still dirty, just with things in more aesthetically pleasing positions. The architect now offers the exercise for this chapter. It is simple in its design and potentially confronting in its execution, which is exactly the right combination for this moment in the journey. The exercise is called the autopilot inventory, You need paper and a pen, not a phone, not a laptop. Paper. The physical act of writing by hand engages different neural circuits than typing. It slows the process enough for the deeper material to surface. It creates a somatic connection to what you're uncovering. Answer 3 questions. Without editing, without performing. Without trying to produce an answer that sounds like someone who has done a lot of personal work. The first question: what happens in my body when I genuinely imagine my life completely transformed 1 year from now? Pause before answering. Close your eyes. Actually imagine it. Then notice not what you think, but what you physically feel in the chest, the stomach, the throat, the shoulders. Is there expansion or contraction? Warmth or tightness? Excitement or a subtle, almost imperceptible sense of dread? The body is answering a question the mind may not be willing to ask. The second question: what are the 3 most repeated sentences the most important adults in my childhood used about money, success, deserving, achievement, or what was possible for people like us? Write them exactly as you remember hearing them. In the voice they came in, let them land. The third question: do those sentences and those physical sensations point in the same direction as the future I say I want, or do they point somewhere else? Do not try to resolve anything here. The point is not resolution. The point is visibility. You cannot work with what you cannot see. And most people have been trying to change patterns. They have never clearly identified, in a layer they have never directly accessed. With tools designed for a completely different level of the system, keep that paper. It is going to matter considerably more than it looks like it does right now. The train enters a tunnel, dark outside. The architect turns on the interior lights. And this is where the conversation gets precise. Joe. Dispenza takes the floor. He has the manner of someone who decided early that the most important thing was not to be taken seriously by institutions, but to be useful to people, and who found, somewhat unexpectedly, that the institutions eventually came around anyway. He would begin like this. The human brain contains approximately 100 billion neurons. Each neuron can form synaptic connections with up to 10,000 others. The theoretical number of possible neural configurations in a single human brain exceeds the number of atoms in the known universe. The problem is not the brain's capacity. The problem is its preference. Because the brain, for all its extraordinary potential, is fundamentally conservative. It is an efficiency machine. And efficiency, in neurological terms, means automation. Every time a thought occurs, a set of neurons fires in a specific pattern. When that pattern repeats, the synaptic connections between those neurons strengthen. The pathway becomes faster, more automatic, more resistant to interruption. This is the mechanism behind skill acquisition, behind habit formation, behind everything we call learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. The pathway becomes a road, then a highway, then an 8-lane freeway with a speed limit nobody enforces. Now apply this to belief. If you spent the first 7 years of your life in an environment where scarcity was the dominant emotional atmosphere, where money was fought over, where there was never quite enough, where the adults around you operated from a baseline of financial anxiety, then the neural networks associated with scarcity didn't just form. They became the freeway, they became the default route, the automatic response. The pattern that activates before conscious thought has time to intervene. And then you discovered personal development. You began installing new thoughts, new affirmations, new visualizations. You created what Dispenza calls a new neural pathway, a new road, and you accessed it consciously, deliberately, with real effort, for 90 days, for a year. And then stress arrived, or fatigue, or an unexpected financial hit, or a relationship that triggered something old. And the brain, under pressure, returned to the freeway, not because you failed, because that is what brains do under stress. They go home. And home, for most people's nervous systems, is the oldest, most familiar pattern. This is why effort alone doesn't produce transformation. Effort applied at the conscious level cannot outrun a subconscious freeway operating at speeds the conscious mind cannot match. Dispenza's research with meditators who achieved measurable neurological and physiological changes, including documented shifts in gene expression, immune function, and in some cases tumor regression, revealed a consistent element. The change didn't happen through conscious willpower. It happened through a combination of elevated emotion, altered brainwave state, and sustained repetition that together created the conditions for genuine neuroplasticity. Let's stay with the brainwave piece for a moment, because it is central to everything that follows. The brain operates in different frequency bands depending on its state of engagement. Beta waves, the dominant state during normal waking consciousness, are associated with analytical thinking, problem-solving, external focus, and the low-grade stress that most people in modern life carry as a baseline. Beta is the state you are in when you are reading this critically, evaluating whether it makes sense, deciding how it applies to you. Alpha waves emerge as the analytical mind relaxes, during light meditation, during daydreaming, during the first few minutes of relaxation. In alpha, the brain becomes more receptive, more creative, more open to making connections that the busy beta mind misses. Theta waves, the state that Lipton identified as dominant in children under 7, appear during deep meditation, during hypnosis, during the hypnagogic transition between waking and sleep. In theta, the critical faculty is suspended. Information enters without the filter of analysis. This is why hypnosis can install new patterns with a speed that years of conscious effort cannot match. It bypasses the gatekeeper. Delta waves are associated with deep, dreamless sleep, with the body's deepest restoration and with states of awareness that most traditions describe as mystical. The critical insight for our purposes is this: the program you are trying to change was installed in theta, and you have been trying to change it in beta. You have been using a waking, analytical, effortful, left hemisphere approach to reach a pattern that lives in a deeper layer. A layer that is only fully accessible when the analytical mind steps back. This is not mysticism. It is neuroscience. And it explains, with considerable precision, why the techniques that feel most rigorous, the ones that require the most conscious effort and analytical engagement, are often the ones that produce the least transformation at the level that matters. Dispenza would add one more piece that the architect wants to make sure lands clearly: the role of emotion in neurological change. Research in psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how psychological states affect neurological and immune function, has established that emotion is not decoration on top of thought. Emotion is the chemical signal that tells the brain how important an experience is, and therefore how strongly to encode it. High emotion experiences create strong, durable neural pathways. Low emotion experiences, regardless of their intellectual content, create weak, temporary connections that fade quickly. This is why you can read a transformational insight and feel moved, and then find 3 days later that it has produced no discernible change in how you think or behave. The intellectual experience was real. The emotional charge was insufficient for durable encoding. The brain filed it under interesting rather than under essential to survival, and therefore permanently installed. Rupert Sheldrake now enters the train, introduced by the architect as someone whose work occupies the productive and uncomfortable territory where biology meets fields that conventional science has not yet developed adequate instruments to measure. Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance proposes that nature is shaped not only by physical laws and genetic inheritance, but by fields of habit, what he calls morphic fields, that carry the accumulated patterns of what has occurred before. Each species, each organism, each system has a morphic field that influences its development and behavior. And crucially, these fields are not limited by space or time in the ways physical matter is. They operate as a kind of non-local memory, a resonant template that individuals within a field can access and are influenced by, regardless of whether They have direct physical contact with others who have established the pattern. For human behavior, the implications are striking. The patterns that run in your family, the financial patterns, the emotional patterns, the relational patterns, the health patterns, may not be transmitted solely through genetic inheritance or learned behavior. They may be resonating through a morphic field that your family has been building and reinforcing for generations. You are not just running your grandfather's programming. You are resonating with a field that your grandfather, your great-grandfather, and every ancestor before them has contributed to. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for precision. Because Sheldrake's framework also suggests that when an individual breaks a pattern, genuinely breaks it, at the level of frequency and not just behavior, that break contributes to the field. It becomes slightly easier for the next person in the system to break the same pattern. You are not just transforming yourself. You are contributing to the morphic field of your family, your culture, your species. Jordan Peterson would nod at this with the expression of someone who has arrived at a similar conclusion from a completely different direction, through Jung's collective unconscious, through the study of myth, through the observation that certain stories and patterns recur across cultures and centuries with a consistency that cannot be explained by coincidence or isolated transmission. And Carl Jung, from the window, would say what he always said in different forms. The deeper you go into the individual psyche, the more you encounter what is not individual at all. Now Hélio, Couto, and the Tequila framework bring this into the language of quantum physics and vibrational frequency. And the architect wants to be precise here, because this is not decoration on top of the science. It is a different instrument measuring the same territory. Quantum field theory describes reality as fundamentally a field of probability, a superposition of potential, states that collapses into specific, observable reality through the act of measurement and observation. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrated that the behavior of particles changes based on whether they are being observed, that the act of observation itself participates in determining what becomes real. This is not an anomaly at the edges of physics. It is a foundational principle of how reality operates at the quantum level, what Hélio Couto applies to human consciousness, and what the Tequila research explores, is the question of what it means for a conscious being to be the observer. If the observer participates in collapsing probability fields into specific outcomes, then the quality of the observer, the clarity, the coherence, the depth of the being doing the observing, is not irrelevant to the results. It is central, and coherence is the key word. In physics, coherence refers to a state in which the waves of a system are aligned, in phase, in frequency, in direction. A laser is coherent light. Ordinary light is incoherent, waves going in every direction, canceling each other out. A coherent signal is orders of magnitude more powerful than an incoherent one of the same energy. When what you think, what you feel, what you believe at the subconscious level, and what you emit as vibrational frequency are all pointing in the same direction, you have coherence. When they are pointing in different directions, when you say abundance and feel scarcity, when you declare possibility and vibrate limitation, you have incoherence. And an incoherent signal does not collapse probability fields with any specificity. It produces noise. It produces the experience of trying and having nothing resolve in the direction you intended. The HeartMath Institute in California has spent 30 years studying a specific form of coherence, cardiac coherence, and its effects on health, cognition, and what they describe as the heart's electromagnetic field. Their research established that the heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond the body, that this field carries information about the heart's rhythmic patterns, and that the state of this field, coherent or incoherent, affects not only the person generating it but the people in proximity to it. Coherent heart rhythms, produced by sustained positive emotional states, like appreciation and care, are associated with measurable improvements in immune function, cognitive performance, hormonal balance, and the ability to access intuitive information. This is the science beneath what people describe as someone having good energy. It is measurable, it is replicable, and it points to a form of intelligence, what HeartMath calls heart intelligence, that operates faster, more broadly, and with different inputs than the analytical mind. If this video is finding you in isolation, if you arrived here through a recommendation or a search without the context of the previous episodes, something important needs to be said directly. What is being built in this Megaseries is not a collection of interesting ideas. It is a structured progression through the actual stages of human transformation, mapped against the hierarchy of human needs that Maslow identified and that Hélio Couto reframed through the lens of quantum physics and consciousness. Each episode has a specific position in that progression. Each one creates the foundation for the next. You can watch this episode and feel genuinely moved, genuinely illuminated. But without the layers that came before it, the illumination will be in the mind. And as we have now established in some detail, the mind is not where the transformation lives. The playlist is on the channel. The sequence is clear. The architecture was built to be followed. Go back if you haven't. The passengers on this train will wait. And now, a preview of where this train is going next. The next episode in this Megaseries enters a territory that most people fear more than any external failure. The recognition that the reality you are currently living is not a mistake. It is not bad luck. It is not the result of circumstances conspiring against you. It is a precise, accurate, perfectly calibrated reflection of who you actually believe yourself to be. At the deepest level that belief operates, that recognition can feel like devastation, or it can feel like the most liberating thing you have ever understood. The difference depends entirely on what you do with the information, and on whether you have done the work in this episode first. But before that, the real cases, the train exits the tunnel. Light returns to the windows, and the architect is going to use this light differently than most personal development content uses it, not to illuminate exceptional stories of dramatic overnight breakthrough, but to illuminate the mechanisms behind changes that were real, sustainable, and structurally sound. Because transformation has a structure, it is not random. And when you understand the structure, you stop looking for the magic and start creating the conditions. The first story is Daniel's 44 years old software engineer. 2 startups that failed in ways that cost him significantly, financially and in terms of the identity he had built around being someone who succeeds. A divorce that took 3 years to finalize legally and considerably longer to metabolize emotionally. Daniel spent 2 years after all of this in what he describes as maximum effort, minimum movement, applying every tool he had encountered, practicing visualization with genuine commitment, attending workshops, doing the breath work, reading Dispenza, reading Peterson, making the changes that looked like transformation from the outside. The numbers in his life moved, but the pattern didn't. The turning point was a Tuesday evening conversation with his 8-year-old son, who asked, with the unguarded precision that children have before they learn to be tactful, why Dad always looked worried even when he said everything was fine. Daniel sat with that question for 48 hours without trying to answer it, just with it. And in that unstructured sitting, something that he had been managing rather than meeting for his entire adult life surfaced with a clarity that no workshop had produced. His grandfather's voice, specific, textured, the way his grandfather would say, during Daniel's childhood, that in their family, meaning first-generation immigrants who had built something from very little, you didn't expect things to be easy. You worked and you survived, and if you were lucky, you left something slightly better for the next generation. The expectation of ease was not part of the inheritance. Daniel had been trying to build abundance while running a program that treated abundance as a violation of family loyalty. The program was not his. It was not his father's. It was his grandfather's, calibrated to his grandfather's actual circumstances. installed in a child who had no way to evaluate whether the program was still relevant. When Daniel finally stopped trying to override the program and started engaging with it directly, sitting with the grief of understanding where it came from, the gratitude for what it had once protected, and the conscious choice to release it from its original function, something shifted at a level that the previous 2 years of effortful practice had not reached. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently, and after consistent, irreversibly. Sheldrake would note that Daniel was not just changing a personal belief. He was shifting his relationship to a morphic field that his family had been building across generations. That kind of shift does not happen through technique. It happens through genuine engagement with the layer where the pattern actually lives. The second story is Jennifer's 36 years old therapist, which, as she points out with the dry humor of someone who knows the literature too well, is not a credential that makes you immune to your own patterns. If anything, it gives you more sophisticated language for describing why you're stuck, which is a different thing from actually being unstuck. Jennifer understood everything she needed to understand about her relational patterns. She had the theoretical framework. She had the vocabulary. She could trace the developmental origins of her anxious attachment with the precision of someone who had both studied it academically and paid thousands of dollars to examine it therapeutically. And she kept repeating the same patterns in relationships with a consistency that she herself found impressive in its precision. What Rogers would have recognized immediately is that Jennifer's incongruence was not at the level of understanding. It was at the level of felt experience. She knew the pattern. She had not felt it, fully, somatically, without the protective mediation of analysis, in the body where it actually lived. The shift came through a somatic approach that, in Jennifer's words, made absolutely no sense to my clinical mind, which is probably exactly why it worked. The analytical mind, the part that knows, that explains, that understands, got confused. And in that confusion, in that moment where the usual commentator went quiet, the body was able to surface what it had been holding without the constant management of a mind that had learned to stay several steps ahead of its own discomfort. What emerged was not a memory in the narrative sense. It was a sensation, a physical texture of what it felt like to be 7 years old and understand, without anyone saying it directly, that her emotional needs were a burden to the adults around her. Not because she had been mistreated, because the adults around her had been overwhelmed. And a 7-year-old in theta-dominant brainwave state doesn't have the cognitive architecture to make that distinction. She installed the experience as a truth about herself rather than a circumstance about them. Lipton would say that Jennifer's cells had been operating from that installation for almost 3 decades. Every relationship she entered, the membrane was reading the field and finding evidence that confirmed the original program. Not because the evidence was objectively there, because the program was selecting for it, finding it in ambiguous signals, interpreting neutral behavior through a filter that had been set 30 years earlier. When the body finally had the experience of being met, fully, without the need to manage or explain or preemptively protect, something in the cellular environment changed. The signal changed. And over time, consistently, the responses began to change with it. Carl Rogers spent decades insisting on something the behavioral sciences were reluctant to accept: that the therapeutic relationship itself, the quality of presence, the depth of genuine understanding between 2 human beings, was not the container for the technique. It was the technique. Being truly seen by another consciousness does something that no amount of self-analysis can replicate. And this is not soft. It is mechanistic. It works through the same nervous system pathways, the same oxytocin and vagal tone and window of tolerance that the hardest neuroscience describes. The third story is not a single person. It is the pattern the architect has observed across hundreds of accounts, messages, comments, conversations that arrive through this channel from people at different points in their process. And the pattern is consistent enough to treat. as a mechanism rather than a coincidence. The people who transform in ways that last share one specific moment, not a technique, not a breakthrough insight, not a particularly powerful session with a facilitator, a moment when the question changes. The question that drives the gap, the question that keeps people in the space between understanding and change, is, how do I get a different life? It is a reasonable question. It sounds like the right question. It orients toward solutions, toward action, toward measurable outcomes. But it is, neurologically and structurally, the wrong question, because it positions the person as separate from the life they want to change. It treats the desired future as an object to be acquired through the right sequence of actions, and it leaves completely unexamined the self that is doing the acquiring, the self that generated the current life and that will, without examination, generate a version of the same life regardless of what external circumstances shift. The question that drives genuine transformation is, what in me is creating this? Not as self-blame, not as an accusation, as an honest inquiry into the mechanism. Because if you can identify the mechanism, you can change it. And if you change the mechanism, the output changes with a consistency that no amount of effortful action applied to the output level can produce. This shift, from how do I get what I want to what in me is generating what I have, is not a cognitive shift. It is an orientation shift. It changes what you are paying attention to. And what you pay attention to, in a system where the observer participates in the observed, is not a passive choice. It is a creative act. Dispenza found in his research with people who achieved clinically documented changes, including complete remissions of conditions that conventional medicine had assessed as irreversible, that in every case, the person had arrived at a specific threshold, not a decision, a threshold, a point at which the old pattern had become so clearly and viscerally costly that returning to it was no longer a viable option at the level of the organism, not just the level of the conscious mind. He describes this as the moment the unconscious receives the message, from a level deeper than thought, that the old program is no longer fit for purpose. And when that message arrives with enough emotional charge, with enough somatic intensity, the brain's neuroplasticity dramatically increases, the window of genuine change opens. And if the right practices are applied during that window, the new pattern installs with a durability that previous efforts could not achieve. The Puritan work ethic, the particular cultural program that runs deep in American cultural identity, creates a specific version of this problem. The Protestant inheritance that shaped so much of how Americans relate to effort and deserving carries an implicit message that sufficient effort is both the path to success and evidence of moral worth. Work hard enough, long enough, purely enough, and results will follow. This is not entirely wrong as a functional principle, but it becomes catastrophically wrong when applied to internal transformation, because it locates the problem in the quantity of effort rather than the quality of the layer being accessed. The Great Depression left an epigenetic mark on American families, a collective trauma that researchers have found echoes in the stress, hormone profiles, and fear responses of descendants who never experienced the original deprivation. The 2008 financial crisis added another layer for millions of families. These are not metaphors. They are documented biological and behavioral inheritances. The scarcity programs running in many American households are not personal failures. They are historical transmissions, morphic fields of collective experience that are still resonating. Understanding this does not remove responsibility, as Peterson would insist. It increases it, because once you understand that the program is a transmission rather than a truth, you have something you did not have before, a choice. You can continue running the inherited program, or you can do the work to install a different one. That work is real. It is not comfortable, and it is available to anyone willing to access the right layer. Bruce Lipton closes this chapter with the biological dimension that grounds everything that has been said. When the internal environment shifts, when the dominant emotional frequency that the body is broadcasting changes from fear to safety, from scarcity to sufficiency, from contraction to expansion, the cells receive different signals. The membrane reads a different environment. Different genes are expressed. Different proteins are produced. Different systems are activated. This is epigenetics, the study of how environmental signals regulate gene expression. And the most important environment your genes are responding to is the internal environment you are continuously creating. Through your emotional and physiological state, you are not the prisoner of your genome. You are the architect of its expression. And the architect is not your conscious mind. The architect is the frequency at which your nervous system is habitually operating, the emotional home base that your body has come to treat as normal. Change the frequency. Change the expression. Change the expression consistently enough, change the life that is not a promise. It is a biological mechanism. Underscore Chapter 5. The train arrives at the central station of this episode, and the architect is going to be direct about what this chapter is and is not. It is not a summary. It is not a send-off. It is the most practically useful part of everything you have heard today, and it will only be useful if it moves from these words into your hands, your body, your daily practice, and your life. If it stays in your mind as an interesting architecture of ideas, it joins the library, and you already have a library. Jordan Peterson would open this chapter with the observation that most people in the personal development space are extraordinarily sophisticated consumers of insight and extraordinarily reluctant practitioners of the uncomfortable things that insight points toward. There is a comfort available in understanding, a sense of having arrived, of having seen the truth, that can function as a substitute for the harder business of actually living differently. He would not say this unkindly. He would say it because it is true. And because the kindest thing you can do for someone standing at the edge of genuine change is to refuse to let them mistake the map for the territory. You have the map. The territory is what remains. The architect presents the coherence protocol, a 21-day installation sequence for a permanent daily practice. 21 days because that is the minimum window that Dispenza's research and the broader neuroplasticity literature identifies for a new neural pathway to develop sufficient strength to begin competing with established patterns under pressure, not to win immediately, to compete. The practice continues indefinitely. The 21 days are the foundation. The protocol has 5 movements. They are performed in sequence every morning, before the brain enters the reactive beta-dominant state that the demands of the day reliably install. The entire sequence requires 15 to 20 minutes. The architect is aware that 15 minutes sounds manageable and that the actual practice of protecting 15 minutes of morning silence in a modern life is considerably harder than it sounds. That difficulty is part of the practice. The commitment to protect the space is itself a message to the nervous system about what is now being treated as a priority. The first movement is the honest diagnosis. Before any affirmation, before any visualization, before any intention setting of any kind. 2 minutes of genuine, unguarded observation of what you are actually feeling, not what you should feel, not what you felt yesterday, what is present right now in the body. Place one hand on the chest, over the heart. Breathe slowly, notice. Name what you find without evaluation. Not I feel anxious and I shouldn't, but there is anxiety here. The naming, without evaluation, activates the prefrontal cortex and initiates the process that neuroscientists call affect labeling, the demonstrated ability of language applied to emotional experience without judgment, to reduce the amygdala's reactivity and increase the window of conscious choice. You are not analyzing, you are witnessing. Jung called this developing the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between what you are and what you intend to become without collapsing into either one. The HeartMath research adds precision here. Even 2 minutes of intentional, heart-focused breathing shifts cardiac coherence measurably. The heart's electromagnetic field begins to organize. And that organizational shift has downstream effects on the brain, the immune system, and the hormonal environment that the body will carry into the rest of the day. The second movement is somatic dissolution. Having identified what is present, you locate where in the body the dominant contraction or tension is held. Not its psychological story, its physical address, the chest, the solar plexus, the jaw, the lower back, somewhere. The body is holding a pattern. It is always somewhere specific. And it has been holding it for long enough that you may have stopped noticing it. For 3 minutes, you breathe directly into that location, not to fix it, not to dissolve it through force, simply to bring conscious attention and breath, which is oxygenated blood, which is cellular nourishment, to the place that has been contracting against awareness. What you are doing, in Lipton's terms, is beginning to change the cellular environment of that region. You are telling the cells there that it is safe to receive different signals. You are, slowly and without drama, beginning to update the membrane's reading of the environment. Some people, during this movement, encounter emotion that surprises them, grief that has no obvious source, a specific memory, a physical release. This is not a malfunction. This is the body beginning to process what the mind has been managing. Let it move. The body is intelligent. It knows what to do with material that has been held if given permission and space to work. The third movement is emotional elevation. This is the movement that must follow the first two, and that almost never produces lasting results when attempted without them. This is the movement that most self-help content offers as a starting point. It is not a starting point. It is a destination that requires the first two movements to make it accessible at the level where it actually changes something. Having witnessed what is present and breathed into what has been held, you now deliberately cultivate the emotional state that corresponds to the future you want to inhabit, not the imagery of the future, the feeling, the felt sense, the specific texture of what it feels like to be the person living that future, safe, expanded, grateful, alive in a way that your current circumstances haven't yet made available, but that your nervous system is now being asked to generate as a biological reality. 5 minutes. With full engagement of the body. Feel the sensation in the chest, what HeartMath would identify as heart coherence, expanding with each breath. Feel the shift in the quality of the breath itself, which is both a cause and an effect of the emotional state. Dispenza is precise about this. The brain cannot tell the difference between a richly imagined emotional experience and an actual one, in terms of the neural and chemical events it produces. When you genuinely feel the future state, not perform it, genuinely feel it, you are producing the neurological and endocrine environment that corresponds to that state. You are giving your cells the signal of a different environment. You are, incrementally and cumulatively, changing the default frequency at which your system operates. The fourth movement is the grounded declaration. Having cultivated the emotional state of the third movement, you now speak your intention into it. This is the function that affirmations were designed to serve, and they fail because they are almost always practiced without the preceding emotional state. An affirmation spoken from fear, from lack, from the contracted baseline of someone who has not done the first three movements, is not a declaration. It is a wish with a guilty conscience, spoken from the elevated, coherent, embodied state of the third movement. The same words become something different. They become a declaration of the frequency you are choosing to inhabit. They become, in Hélio Couto's language, a coherent signal that the field can respond to because it is not being contradicted by what the rest of the system is emitting. Begin with I am. Not I will be, not I am becoming, I am. Present tense, frequency declared as current reality. Let it be specific to what you identified in your autopilot inventory. Let it speak directly to the program you are in the process of replacing. The fifth movement is the record. By hand, one sentence that captures the quality of the state you experienced during the practice, not an analysis. Not an evaluation of how well you performed the protocol, an experiential note. A single sentence that holds the felt sense of what happened. Today, the expansion in my chest felt real for the first time, not performed. Today, I felt the grief beneath the pattern and did not manage it. Away. Today, the declaration landed somewhere different from where it has been landing. The record creates conscious episodic memory of the state. The next morning, reading yesterday's record before beginning, you give the brain a reference point, a neural address, for the state you are trying to return to. Over 21 days. The accumulated record becomes a body of evidence that the nervous system begins to treat as a template rather than an anomaly. And now the power exercise for this episode. The architect calls it the frequency mirror. You need genuine silence, a mirror, and the specific quality of honesty that most people spend their entire adult lives engineering their circumstances to avoid. Sit in front of the mirror. Not bathroom ritual proximity, deliberate proximity. Close enough to see your own eyes clearly. Look into your eyes. Not at your face, not at your hair, not at whatever you usually see when you look in a mirror into your eyes. The eyes, neurologically, are an extension of the brain, the only part of the central nervous system directly visible from outside the body. Looking into your own eyes is, in a literal sense, looking at your own nervous system. Stay there for 5 minutes with a single question. Who is actually here, not who you present, not who you aspire to be, not the identity you have constructed through achievement or role or relationship. Who is here, behind all of that? In the nervous system looking back at you. Do not answer. Stay with the question. Allow the discomfort of not knowing, or of beginning to know, to be present without resolution. Then ask a second question. What does this person actually believe? At the deepest level I can access right now, about what they deserve, about what is possible for them, about who they fundamentally are. Again, do not perform an answer. Do not give the evolved answer. Let what is true surface at whatever speed it surfaces. Then the third question, where did that belief come from? Did I choose it? Or was it installed before I had the capacity to choose? Hold that question long enough for it to locate its own answer in you. And then, looking into your own eyes, speak this aloud. I choose, from this moment forward, to question any belief about myself that was not consciously chosen by me. I am not the program. I am the one who can observe the program. And the one who can observe it is not bound by it. For some of you, this will be a calm, clear moment. For some of you, something is going to move. Let it move. Watts would say that the moment you stop managing your own experience and allow it to be what it is, you have done something more powerful than any technique can produce. Because you have stepped briefly and genuinely into the position of the witness. And the witness is not trapped in what is being witnessed. The mantra for this episode, 21 days, 3 times daily. After the protocol in the morning, once in the afternoon, once. Before sleep, spoken aloud, with the body engaged. Not recited, declared. I am not trying to transform myself. I am remembering who I always was, beneath what was installed before I could choose. The pattern that limited me was not me. It was the environmental frequency I absorbed during a window when I had no filter. I now choose consciously. I choose coherence. What I think, what I feel in my body, what I declare, and what I emit as frequency point in the same direction. The quantum field responds to what I am, not to what I request. And what I am, from this moment forward, is expansion, coherence, and the precise availability of genuine change. I am this. Breathe after each recitation. Place your hand on your chest. Notice what the body registers. Write one sentence about what you find. And now the A delivered directly, without dressing it as something other than what it is, because the architect believes that the people on this train deserve honesty, more than they need persuasion. This Megaseries is a structure, not a collection of videos. A structure built in a specific sequence against a specific map of the territory of human transformation. What Maslow identified as the hierarchy of human needs, what Couto reframed through the lens of quantum physics and consciousness, what Dispenza is confirming with neuroimaging, what Lipton is grounding in cellular biology, what Sheldrake is extending into the non-local fields of collective pattern, all of it points to the same fundamental truth. Transformation is not random. It has stages. It has a sequence. And skipping stages does not accelerate the process. It creates the experience of trying without arriving, which is precisely the gap we have been examining in this episode. Every previous episode of this series is on this channel. The playlist is organized in sequence. If you have not watched them, the most useful thing you can do after this video is go back to the beginning and follow the architecture as it was built to be followed. Not because the architect says so, because your nervous system needs the layers in order. Because the insight in one episode is the soil in which the next one plants something that will not grow without it. Subscribe, not for the numbers, for the continuity. Because returning here consistently, making the decision to show up for this process regularly, is itself a message to your subconscious about what you are now treating as essential. The subconscious responds to behavioral evidence, not to declared intentions. Subscribing and returning is behavioral evidence. It registers at the level where it matters. Share this episode with one person, exactly one, who is living inside the gap we described at the beginning of this video. Someone who has tried. Someone who understands the concepts and cannot understand why their life isn't moving. Not to help them with information, to invite them into the field that this community is building together. Sheldrake would say that a morphic field of genuine transformation, of people doing the real work at the real layer, becomes increasingly accessible to each new person who enters it. You are not just sharing a video. You are extending a field. Leave a comment with what surfaced during the mirror exercise. What arose in the 5 minutes of sitting with who is actually here, not a polished reflection. The raw material. Because naming it in writing is the sixth movement of the coherence protocol, and because the accumulation of honest voices in this space contributes to something that is larger than any individual account. The next episode departs soon. The passengers are staying aboard. The architecture continues. I am the quantum architect, and you did not arrive here by accident.